Morning, everyone. I call the Senate to order and recognize Senator Carson for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate adjourn from the late session.
All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion to adjourn passes. We are now in the early session, and the Senate will recognize a very special person, Senator Ricciardi, to say our morning.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, fellow senators. Dear God, we pray for Chris Sununu, the governor of New Hampshire, and for the state Senate of New Hampshire and New Hampshire House of Representatives, and all others who are entrusted to guard our political welfare. We give you thanks for the many blessings you have bestowed upon us. Grant us harmony and peace in our discussions. Give us the wisdom, courage, and fortitude we need to lead your people. Give us prudent voices, listening ears, and open hearts to work together to serve our constituents. Father, I would just pray that you would give us unity with the issues at hand. That way, we may come always from a place of love and kindness. Forgive us when we forget our calling to serve the people and instead make it about us or the party we belong to. Give us the courage to speak what is true and the modesty to be able to compromise. I ask that you protect our senators, their staff, and their families. We are grateful for them and their service to the state of New Hampshire. Amen.
Thank you very much, Senator Ricciardi. Now we're going to go a little bit out of order because we have a special guest here this morning, Senator Sherman. He'll be introduced in a moment. But Senator, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Introduction of guests. Senator Murphy.
Mr. President, thank you. Please welcome to the Senate today my fiancée, Ms. Michelle Brown. Please welcome her. She makes it all possible for me to be here. Thanks.
Senator Altshuler.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to welcome our guest, the Honorable Tom Sherman, my predecessor for the Seacoast communities of District 24, and we're happy to see him back in the halls advocating for the public health of all Granite Staters. Welcome back.
Are there further introduction of guests? Seeing none, without objection, today's FN report is adopted. Now we move to the consent calendar. Senator Carson moves that the consent calendar with the relevant amendments as printed in the day's calendar be adopted, that all such bills found ought to pass be ordered as follows. FN bills not waived under Senate Rule 4.5 to the Committee on Finance. Non-FN bills approved for referral to Finance by the day's FN report to the Committee on Finance, and all other bills to third reading. All in favor of the motion, please say aye. 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 All opposed, no. The ayes have it. The consent calendar is adopted. Moving to the regular calendar, the Senate will be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Commerce, to which was referred Senate Bill 100, an act relative to the payment of salaried employees. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is inexpedient to legislate by a vote of 4-1. Senator Soucy for the committee.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 100 and expedient to legislate. This bill would have allowed an employer to terminate an employee after they've provided notice to quit. If terminated, an employee would not receive payment for the following 2 weeks of their notice. And I would further note that many of our labor laws exist merely as guidelines and as a floor, and this would be far more intrusive into the employee-employer relationship. Majority of the Commerce Committee felt that this would not be respectful to employees, some who may have worked for an employer for decades, and therefore the committee asks for your support on the motion of inexpedient to legislate on Senate Bill 100. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Susi. The motion is inexpedient to legislate. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, the question is on the adoption of the committee recommendation of inexpedient to legislate on Senate Bill 100. Are you ready for the question? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion of inexpedient is adopted. And we will move to education and be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Education, to which was referred Senate Bill 77, an act relative to changes in school placement for students. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass by a vote of 3-2. Senator Lang for the committee.
Senator Lang.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 77 ought to pass. This bill requires Board of Education rules on manifest educational hardship to allow school boards' assignment of a pupil to an approved private school. It is important to recognize that this bill does not result in any policy change, but is meant to bring existing state law into compliance with the U.S. Supreme Court precedent. During the Education Committee's hearings, testimony was provided articulating this view, referencing RSAs 193 and 193:3 as existing state law to be clarified with this legislation, and 193:3E as a subsection meant to be modified in compliance with the aforementioned. I ask for your support on this motion of ought to pass on Senate Bill 77. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Lang. Senator Prentice.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in opposition to the committee's recommendation of ought to pass for Senate Bill 77. Laws for manifest educational hardship placement already exist, and I support the ability of parents, and when necessary, school districts up to the State Board of Education to avail themselves of these processes in the best interests of the child. That's not my concern with this legislation. It was not my concern when we heard House Bill 388 in 2021. My concern remains with public dollars flowing into private education and using the manifest educational hardship process as a way to do so. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Prentice. Senator Waters to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in opposition to the motion, and I want to, in a way, just open up a series of questions about the implications potentially of this bill. I remember Defense Secretary Rumsfeld, talking about known unknowns, and I think there's some known unknowns here on this. And just to and I don't think some of these questions got answered in the hearing by the Department of Education. So just to remind the Senate what manifest educational hardship is in 193:3(2)A, it means that a student has a documented hardship in his or her current educational placement, and that such hardship has a detrimental or negative impact on the student's academic achievement or growth, physical safety, or social and emotional well-being. Such hardship must be so severe, pervasive, or persistent that it interferes with or limits the ability of the student to receive an education. Now, interestingly, this kind of language has been something I've been very supportive of when it comes to some programs like career and technical ed, that to make sure that students, if they can't get a curriculum where they are, that we say, yeah, you can go elsewhere, and it may even be in some cases that you can go to a private academy where that curriculum is offered, because I think it's a manifest educational hardship if somebody cannot get the education that's going to mean that they can become a productive member of the workforce. And certainly there are cases where we know where students have had such an experience, whether it involves trauma in some ways or not, that they really need to go somewhere else. But this language sets me to speculate a little bit. We all think of our own experiences. So I sent my child, who by the age of 2 or 3, it was pretty clear that body was going to dance, right? It happens sometimes. Your kid is just like the light goes on, and that's who they are, and that's essential to their well-being as well as their future. So I never expected that the city of Dover would pay for me to send him first to Berwick Academy, because they had a full-blown dance program, and of course Dover did not, and then a little bit later on to Walnut Hills School for the Performing Arts, which was the professional track. Of course, he left there after 11th grade to go professional, and so that was the end of his education in terms of that way. But there it is, and I was puzzled about this. Then would that be something that the school board would have to address? Whether somebody's a gifted musician, gifted artist. But then I started to think a little bit more about my son. He's African American, he's gay, and part of his thinking when he was thinking about schools after he came out is it's, look, I'm already the only black kid here, and I don't, there are a lot of issues around that in terms of education and attitudes and support and so on and so forth. He says, am I also going to be the only black queer kid who's out? And, so it was like, okay, maybe we can find a school where there might be more students of color and there might be more gay students. Well, all right, go to Performing Arts High School. He's gonna have some company. But it got me to thinking. So, our situation now, if a student comes forward and says that my curriculum, this would be a black student or a white student, anybody, says the curriculum at my school now is so constrained when it comes to talking and teaching about African American history or issues of race, because we've been through this the last couple of years. Or if a student comes forward and says, the sex education, the sexual abuse prevention education is not being handled well, or the mental health education is not being handled well, or there's an atmosphere which is manifest in my town, which is anti-LGBTQ, then do we say that a parent on these circumstances has manifest educational hardship? No, I don't know, and I support parents. I think parents know best about their kids, but this is why I mean the known unknowns, right? We know this is going to come up, right? There's no question about it, that these kinds of things are going to come up. And what is the Department of Education what is the school board supposed to do? And then if it gets appealed to the Department of Ed, to the commission, what are they going to do? And then you can bet it's going to go to court, and then courts are going to look at this language. And so I don't know. I just think that, unfortunately, the hearing did not get answers from the Department of Ed on just how there'd be rulemaking about this. So that's all it is. And so for me, I just don't think this bill is quite ready to be voted favorably out of the body. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Waters. Senator Lang to speak a second time.
Thank you, Mr. President. So having served 6 years on the school board and actually dealt with 2 manifest hardship cases, these cases are usually most horrific. One case was a significant bullying case where a student could no longer go to the school that he was in. And the parent came, presented their case in a non-public session to the school board. The school board heard that case and agreed, and was able to try to find the best interest in the students. In the bullying case, in that particular case, it was going to another public school. The parent was able to work out an arrangement with another public school and make it work. My second case was a little more horrific. It was involving a rape of a student by another student. And in this case, the school board found that there was having that child come back to, that student come back to the school was going to cause significant educational hardship, having to deal with that in the school system. But in that case, it was a high school student, and in my school district, we happen to have a private high school. And it was best for that child to be able to maintain within their own community and be able to attend that private school. Now understand that both the parent and the school board have to say yes. This isn't an either or. The school board doesn't push them out, and neither does the parent push them out. It is a combination of both the parent saying this is a problem, the school board agreeing this is a problem. Understand that this is already practiced in the state of New Hampshire. Throughout 193, we allow approved private schools. What this does is bring this one subsection of law that was missed in the update into alignment with the rest of 193. I ask you to please vote yes and allow these students to be able to do what's best for them in their local communities. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Lang. Senator Ward.
This bill is actually to put back in the statute what we already have. The manifest hardship was omitted in our statutes, so we need to put it back in. You talk about it's not really expected to be any great cost for this. I have a list of how many kids are getting the, asking for, excuse me, the hardship thing. For example, we have here in 1922, there was 0 kids, 0 families asking for the educational hardship designation. In 23, it looks like we have 2. In 17, there were 3, 18, 7, 19, 5, 21, 2. It seems to me that if something has been omitted, we need to realign and put it back in our statute so that we have it there, and that's what this whole bill is all about. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Senator Carson.
Mr. President, I rise in support of the committee recommendation of ought to pass. I think we need to realize that this is something that has been done in New Hampshire for quite a while. And I know that there's been discussion about money, but I think we need to just maybe change our focus a little bit and think about what's in the best interest of that particular child. And I like the idea that we are trying to continue to foster relationships between parents and school boards, especially right now, where you see a lot of parents at odds with school boards. Here we have them working together to do what's in the best interest of the child. And if that means by a decision of the parents and the school board that the needs of that child is going to be better met in a private school, why would we as a legislature stand in their way? So I see this as enabling legislation, Mr. President, empowering parents and school boards to do what's in the best interest of the child. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Carson. Senator Birdsall for a question of?
The good senator from District 2.
Does Senator Lang yield?
Thank you for taking my question. According to the hearing report, this isn't considered a policy change. The approved private schools are mentioned, but they were left out based out of RSA 193:3, and this was based on a decision by the Supreme Court, a Supreme Court decision in 2021. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct.
Thank you.
Is there any further discussion? I'm sorry, Senator Susi.
I request a 2-minute recess.
2-minute recess. The Senate will come out of recess, please. The bill is now on second reading. Is there any further discussion? Senator Carson for a parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. President. Esteemed colleagues, if you believe, as I believed, that this bill really empowers both school boards and parents, encouraging dialogue about what is best for the child, what is best in their educational interest. If you believe, Mr. President, as I believe, that this is something that has happened in New Hampshire and has been happening for years. And Mr. President, if you believe, as I believe, that this particular issue was left out of the cleanup of the statute, and all this bill does is puts that language back into the statute, would you please join me in voting yes on Senate Bill 77? Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Carson. Senator Prentice for a parliamentary inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. President. If I know that the best interests of our children are served by manifest educational hardships, the process, and I know that this is the existing law already allows for this process, and I know that the New Hampshire School Board Association did sign in opposed to Senate Bill 77 in committee, and I know that, again, moving public dollars away from public education into private education raises property taxes, would I vote no?
Thank you very much, Senator Prentice. Are we ready for the question? Senator Avard has asked for a roll call, seconded by Senator Birdsell. All in favor, answer when the clerk calls your name. And all opposed, do the same.
Senator Gendreau.
Yes.
Senator Lang.
Yes.
Senator Waters? No. Senator Prentice?
No.
Senator Gray?
Yes.
Senator Innes?
Yes.
Senator Ward?
Yes.
Senator Rishardi?
Yes.
Senator Fenton?
No.
Senator Chanley?
No.
Senator Avard?
Yes.
Senator Rosenwald?
No.
Senator Carson?
Yes.
Senator Whitley?
No.
Senator Murphy?
Yes.
Senator Pearl?
Yes.
Senator Susie?
No.
Senator Birdsell?
Yes.
Senator D'Alessandro?
No.
Senator Perkins Kwoka?
No.
Senator Abbas?
Yes.
Senator Gannon?
Yes.
Senator Altschiller?
No.
Senator Bradley?
Yes. The ayes have it, 14 to 10. The motion of ought to pass is adopted, and the bill is ordered to third reading. We'll move now to election law. The Senate will be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Election Law and Municipal Affairs, to which was referred Senate Bill 47, an act establishing a commission to study barriers to increase density of residential development in New Hampshire. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass with an amendment by a vote of 5-0. Senator Perkins Kwoka for the committee.
Senator Perkins Kwoka.
Thank you, Mr. President. SB 47 will establish a commission to study barriers to increased density of residential development in New Hampshire. It will be a continuation of a prior commission that was unable to finish important studies due to the COVID pandemic, including work on the septic density regulations. Much of the work done by this commission is needed to address the housing crisis in New Hampshire and promote expansion of residential housing all across the state. The Election Law and Municipal Affairs Committee asks for your support.
Thank you very much, Senator Perkins Kwoka. The bill is now on second reading. The first order of business is the committee amendment. Is there any discussion on the committee amendment? Senator Perkins Kwoka.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would ask that the body vote down the committee amendment so I may introduce a floor amendment.
The question is on the adoption of the committee amendment. All in favor of the committee amendment, please say aye. All opposed, say no. No. The noes have it. The question is on the adoption of, no, I'm very sorry. I recognize Senator Perkins Kwoka for a floor amendment. I'll get this yet.
Thank you, Mr. President. If I may, I'd like to introduce Amendment 0123S.
Senator Perkins Kwoka is recognized to speak to the floor amendment.
Thank you, President Bradley. In front of you, you're getting copies of Amendment 0123S. So to clarify, what we did in the committee amendment on this bill was to adjust the legislative membership of this commission from 4 senators and 4 representatives to 2 senators and 6 representatives. And so that change is reflected in our floor amendment, which is why I asked you to vote down the committee amendment. In addition, what our floor amendment does is to change some of the membership of the commission. It removes the New Hampshire Municipal Association from having its own seat on the commission and combines them with the planning commissions and replaces that seat with a representative of the New Hampshire Association of Realtors at the request of one of my fellow committee members. And it also maintains our 15-person membership cap. It also adds an attachment to the Office of Planning and Development in the Bureau of Economic Affairs at the request of the majority staff. Happy to answer any questions, but I'd ask for your support on this floor amendment.
Thank you very much. Is there any discussion on floor amendment 123S? Seeing none, the question is on the adoption of the floor amendment. Are you ready for the question? All in favor of the floor amendment say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Nay. The ayes have it. The floor amendment is adopted. The bill is still on second reading and open for further discussion or amendment. Seeing no further discussion or amendment, the question is on adoption of the ought to pass as amended on Senate Bill 47. Are we ready for the question? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed, no? No. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. And the bill is ordered to third reading. The Senate will please be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The Committee on Energy and Natural Resources, to which was referred Senate Bill 68 FN, an act relative to municipal hosts for purpose of limited electrical energy producers. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass by a vote of 3-0. Senator Abard for the committee.
Senator Abard.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 68 FN ought to pass. Senate Bill 68 FN allows municipal hosts who are located in the same utility franchise service territory to partner up and take part in a project that qualifies for energy metering. A municipal host may be owned by either a public or a private entity. Some examples include a city, a town, a county, or a school district. And by allowing these entities to enter into a partnership, it will allow for more net metering projects in New Hampshire. Additionally, by enabling more ways for participation in net energy projects, it will help to keep New Hampshire generated power in the state of New Hampshire. And with the ever-rising prices of energy, the more power generated in the state is better controlled over the price of power. This is a great bipartisan bill, and I want to thank my colleagues in the Senate Energy for helping with this bill, and so please support us in passing this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
The bill is on second reading. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the question is on the adoption of the committee recommendation of ought to pass on Senate Bill 68. Are we ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of ought to pass is adopted. Senate Bill 68 is ordered to third reading. The Senate will be attentive to the clerk, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Finance, to which was referred Senate Bill 1 FNA, an act relative to the Sununu Youth Services Center. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass with an amendment by a vote of 6-0. Senator Gray for the committee.
Senator Gray.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 1 FNA ought to pass with amendment. These floor remarks will begin differently than most of my floor remarks, because the first thing I want to do is thank every one of the senators in here for their bipartisan efforts to get this bill this far, this fast. It is needed, and we appreciate it. As we all know, Senate Bill 1 FNA requires the Department of Health and Human Services to construct a secure treatment facility for juveniles with a maximum physical capacity of up to 18 beds and an operational plan to support 12 beds. Under the current law, the existing Sununu Youth Service Center is scheduled to close in March of 2023. This bill is needed to delay the closure until the opening of the new facility. Senate Bill 1 provides for $15 million appropriation in fiscal year 2023 for the design construction of the new facility. The governor's office at the Finance Committee meeting has said that they have reserved $15 million of American Rescue Plan Act money for that. The committee amendment requires quarterly progress reports indicating whether the reported progress is sufficient to meet the November 1st, 2024 deadline. The amendment also establishes a commission to study public safety of the Youth Development Center and surrounding communities. The Senate Finance Committee recommends passage of Senate Bill 1 with the amendment and asks for your support. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Gray. The bill is now on second reading. The first order of business is the committee amendment. Senator Birdsall.
I rise in support of this amendment. I know last week I chose not to, but thank you to the good senator from District 14 for bringing an amendment on the public safety issue, which was one of my biggest concerns, as well as the financial piece of it. I know we've capped it at $15 million. I can tell you I still have concerns that $15 million is not going to be enough because we've got a facility I'm understanding going up in Rockingham County that's going to be already at $54 million. So I'm hoping that at some point further down the road we can address that issue. The one thing I do hope, and that's nothing that can be done on this body, but the Commission on the Public Safety says 3 members of the House of Representatives, the New Hampshire Sheriff's Association, local law enforcement. So whoever makes this decision has to make a decision on where it's going to go pretty quickly because this effective date for this commission to start, if I read correctly, is February 28th. So these municipalities need to know if they're going to be part of this commission, they need to know. So with that, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Birdsall. Is there further discussion on the committee amendment? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee amendment. Are we ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. The ayes have it. The committee amendment is adopted. The bill is on second reading. Is there any further discussion or amendment? Senator Rosenwald.
Mr. President, I too rise in support of SB 1 as with the amendment. The Finance Committee added belt and suspenders language to the appropriations section. We also found a good way, I think, to address the security concerns without slowing down the process of moving the children out of the Sununu Youth Services Center to a smaller, more appropriate facility as expeditiously as possible. And I hope we will all vote yes on the pending motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rosenwald. Senator Carson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Like my colleague from Senate District 16, I rise to thank all of you for all your help and your words, your suggestions with this bill. This is critical that we get this done. We cannot close the facility without having a new one in place. And thinking about what my colleague from District 15 said last week, we have to remember that we're talking about some of our state's neediest children, and we have to do the right thing. And I want to thank all of you in this chamber for working together to do the right thing. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Carson. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, the question is on the adoption of the motion of ought to pass as amended on Senate Bill 1. Are we ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. The ayes have it. The motion of ought to pass as amended is adopted, and the bill is ordered to third reading. The Senate will be attentive to the clerk.
Mr. President, the Committee on Ways and Means, to which was referred Senate Bill 17, an act establishing gifts and donations account within the Fish and Game Fund. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass by a vote of 3-0. Senator Lang for the committee.
Senator Lang.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 17 ought to pass. This bill will allow donations received by the Fish and Game Department for the Non-Game Species Fund to be exempt from approval from the Governor and Executive Council and the Fish and Game Commission. This will streamline and simplify the non-game species program's procedures for accepting donations from the public and will improve timeliness of applying those donations to their intended purposes. The Ways and Means Committee asks for your support on a motion of ought to pass. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Senator Lang. The bill is now on second reading. Is there any discussion? The question is on the adoption of the committee recommendation of ought to pass on Senate Bill 17. Are we ready for the question? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of ought to pass is adopted, and the bill is ordered to third reading. The Senate will continue to be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Ways and Means, to which was referred Senate Bill 18, an act relative to the purchase of duck stamps and the suspension or revocation of license issued by the Fish and Game Commission. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass by a vote of 3-0. Senator Lang for the committee.
Senator Lang.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 18 ought to pass. This bill will allow individuals to purchase an electronic duck stamp online. Proof of such electronic purchase will be sufficient rather than having a physical piece of paper on one's person. The bill also cleans up an inconsistency that was found between RSA 644:13 and RSA 207:3-A regarding the discharge of a firearm within 300 feet of a compact area. This clarifies that a conviction of unauthorized use of a firearm is grounds for suspension or revocation of a hunting, fishing, or trapping license. The Ways and Means Committee asks for your support on the motion of ought to pass. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Lang. The bill is on second reading. Is there any discussion? The question is on the adoption of the committee recommendation of ought to pass. Are we ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of ought to pass is adopted, and the bill is ordered to third reading. The Senate will continue to be attentive to the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Committee on Ways and Means, to which was referred Senate Bill 20FN, an act relative to Keno license applications and fees. Having considered the same, the committee recommends that the bill is ought to pass by a vote of 3-0. Senator Lang for the committee.
Senator Lang for the trifecta.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move Senate Bill 20 ought to pass. This bill eliminates a $500 fee that the state charges licensees for the operation of Keno. The committee heard testimony from the Executive Director of the Lottery Commission stating that Keno is the only lottery product sold in a retail location that the state charges a license fee for. Given that over $53 million worth of Keno tickets were sold last year with a profit of about $10 million, the license fee is immaterial. The second part of the bill simply cleans up an inconsistency definitions in statute relative to what qualifies as what constitutes a disqualifying offense and makes no change to who is disqualified. The Ways and Means Committee asks for your support on a motion of ought to pass. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Lang. The bill is now on second reading. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, the question is on adoption of the committee recommendation of ought to pass on Senate Bill 20. Are we ready for the question? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The motion of ought to pass is adopted, and Senate Bill 20 is ordered to third reading. I'm sorry. It's ordered to finance. And now, I will recognize Senator Carson for motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate adjourn from the early session, that the business of the late session be in order at the present time, that all bills and resolutions ordered to a third reading be by this resolution read a third time, all titles being the same as adopted, and that they be passed at the present time.
Adjourned. We are now in the late session. Are there announcements to come before the Senate? Are there personal privileges to come before the Senate? So in that case, I'm going to recognize Senator Waters for just a moment. Da, 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 da.
Well, as Mick Jagger said, older but gooder. So let's sing happy birthday to Senator Avard. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday, dear Kevin.
Happy birthday to you.
And thank you, Senator Waters. I believe we have a couple of guests coming in the floor. Is that correct?
Yes. We have some guests.
One moment. Welcome, Speaker Packard. And we are waiting for two of our finest members of OLS who are retiring, Sharon and Anthony, to come up so that we can all recognize them. And, you know, we got done so quickly.
They're coming now.
Senator Pearl is going to be able to resume his plowing by 1:30, as I promised. And I'll take this opportunity to say good job to everybody on Senate Bill 1. It was excellent work. And thanks to everybody that's been keeping our roads safe and sound over the last few days. So here we go. Come on up. Sharon and Anthony have been here as long, I think, as Sherman and I have been here. They are mainstays of OLS. We are definitely going to miss them. When I look at both of them, I can't believe either of you are at retirement age, but, you know, I guess I don't want to look in the mirror either. Mr. Speaker, do you want to say a few words?
Well, I certainly want to, the House certainly wants to recognize Sharon Simon. She's been here 38 years. Believe it or not, that is a couple of years more than Jeb and I have been here, but not many. Sharon?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the House would certainly like to recognize Anthony, who's been here for 26 years, and Jeb and I have been here for 26 years, so, but we certainly want to recognize Anthony. We want to thank both of them for their service for the last 38 and 26 years. We're going to miss you. But I hope you enjoy your retirement.
Thank you.
And if I could just make one quick statement, it's an honor standing up here. My father stood up here as Senate President back in '59 and '60.
Sharon, Anthony, would you like to say something? Because I think everybody would like to hear from you. Sharon, go ahead.
I would just like to say it's been a pleasure working with all of you. I'm going to miss everyone, but I'm not going to miss the long nights working on the budget. And I'm planning on doing some traveling in my time off, and I'll be back to visit sometime. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. President and Mr. Speaker. Thank you to the members of the Senate and staff for this honor. I never thought that I'd be standing up here at this moment saying anything to either of the bodies, but here we are, and I appreciate that. It's been a pleasure and an honor to work with all of you. And the one observation I'll say as someone who's now in the retirement mode is, you know, when you retire, you get these cards from your coworkers. And in those cards, there are all these really good well wishes, and some of them are more detailed than others. And you read those cards and you realize, wow, I didn't realize I did that for this person, but this other person recognized that, or this other person noticed something that was done. And it just occurs to me that those little things really mean a lot. And it's good to sort of keep track of that and to keep that in mind that, you know, no matter how small the gesture is, it can make a difference to someone, and you may not notice it, but that person does notice it. So I too, like Sharon, will be traveling and probably working some more because I don't think that I can sit still for very long. But it's been an honor and a pleasure to work for the General Court, and I appreciate this honor. Thank you.
The Senate also has resolutions for both Anthony and Sharon.
Thank you.
And please join me in saying thank you one last time. The one thing I would say is to both of you, don't be strangers. You're always welcome. Come on back. Are there any other personal privileges or any other business to come before the Senate? Without objection, all personal privileges or unanimous consent remarks shall be entered into the permanent journal of the Senate under Rule 216 and Rule 217. Is there any further business? Seeing none, I recognize Senator Carson for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the business of the day being completed, that the Senate recess to the call of the chair for the purposes of introducing legislation, re-referring bills to committee, scheduling hearings, sending and receiving messages, vacating bills, and processing enrolled bill reports and amendments, and when we recess to the call of the chair.
Thank you, Senator Carson. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. The Senate is in recess to the call of the chair.